They spent $10 million building a mansion on my family's land. Marble floors. Solar panels. A 4-car garage. And on a Tuesday morning I locked the only road in with a $47 padlock and put the key in my pocket. They owned the building. I owned the ground around it. And I was done being reasonable. They spent $10 million building a mansion on my family's land and forgot to check who owned the road. That was their mistake. Not the only one. But the one that mattered most. On a Tuesday morning in April I stood at the entrance of a gravel road that my great-grandmother had walked every single day of her adult life, and I watched a crew bolt a steel gate to 2 concrete posts while a lawyer named Clara Osei stood beside me with a folder of documents that could dismantle everything Meridian Luxury Estates had built in the last 3 years. The lock clicked into place at 7:23. 1 key. Plain ring. Nothing ceremonial about it. I put it in my jacket pocket and turned to look down the road. 312 feet of gravel running straight to the circular driveway of the most expensive private residence in the county. 10 bedrooms. A wine cellar. A home theater. A rooftop terrace with views of the valley that a real estate photographer had described in the listing as nothing short of breathtaking. Breathtaking. The people who built it had looked at everything above the ground and decided that was all that mattered. The marble. The glass. The solar array. The smart home system that controlled every light and every lock from a phone screen. They forgot to look at the ground itself. They forgot to check whose name was on the deed that described every inch of soil their $10 million dream was sitting on. My name is Rain Caldwell. My family has owned these 12 acres since September of 1924. My great-grandmother Estelle negotiated the purchase herself in a county clerk's office when black families owning land of this size in this county was not simply uncommon. It was actively, aggressively, systematically discouraged. She did it anyway. She put the deed in a fireproof box and she told her daughter what it meant, and her daughter told hers, and her daughter told me. I have held that document. I know the weight of it. I know what it cost to produce it and what it cost to keep it and what it means that it is still in perfect condition after 100 years, because every woman in my family understood that a piece of paper with the right words on it is not just paper. It is a weapon. And on a Tuesday morning in April I finally used it. Some wounds change you. Some betrayals break you. And some people, quietly, deliberately, rise. This is a quiet storm story. This story does not begin with the gate. It begins with a fence that needed replacing. 18 months before the Tuesday morning my mother asked a local contractor to replace the old wooden boundary markers along the southern edge of the property. The original posts had been deteriorating for years. She wanted something permanent. Something that would still be standing in another 50 years. The contractor arrived on a Wednesday with a GPS unit and a copy of the original 1924 deed survey. He was a thorough man. The kind who walks a line 3 times before he trusts what he is seeing. He walked it 3 times. Then he stopped. He called my mother over to the edge of the property and showed her the screen on his GPS unit and pointed at the corner of a building that had been under construction on the neighboring lot for the previous 8 months. The Meridian Guesthouse Annexe, a separate structure from the main mansion, built to the same $10 million standard, was sitting 14 feet inside the Caldwell property boundary. 14 feet of ancestral soil. Under their foundation. Without permission. Without disclosure. Without a single conversation with the family whose name had been on the deed for 100 years. My mother called me while I was still at work. I drove home in 40 minutes and stood at the boundary and looked at the corner of that building and felt something settle in my chest that was not quite anger and not quite grief. It was recognition. The recognition of something that had been happening for a long time finally becoming visible. I took 47 photographs before I called Clara Osei. The GPS coordinates. The guesthouse corner. The distance between where their building ended and where our boundary began. The original survey markers, concrete posts set by Estelle's surveyor in 1924, still sitting in the ground exactly where they had been placed. 100 years in the same position. Unmoved. Unambiguous. Waiting for exactly this moment. Clara answered on the third ring. Within 30 seconds of hearing what the contractor had found, her voice shifted into a register I would come to recognize over the following months. The controlled precision of someone who is already 3 steps ahead of the conversation. Send everything. All 47 photographs. The original deed. Every survey document you have going back to 1924. Do it tonight. Everything went that night. She called the following morning. What she told me in the next 20 minutes was not what I expected. Not because it was worse than the 14 feet. Because it was considerably more than 14 feet. Clara's surveyor had pulled the complete property records. Every survey conducted on the Caldwell land since the original 1924 filing. 3 independent surveys across 96 years, 1924, 1987 and a 2019 county tax assessment, all showing the same boundary line. And the Meridian survey, the one they had commissioned before breaking ground, showed a boundary line that was 17 feet south of where every other survey had ever placed it. 17 feet of Caldwell land under their guesthouse. But the boundary encroachment was not even the most significant thing Clara had found. The access road, the 312 feet of gravel running from the county highway to the Meridian circular driveway, had never been formally deeded to Meridian or to the private buyer who had purchased the estate from them. It was a private access point crossing family land. Unmaintained by the landowner. And under the specific property statutes of this county, an unmaintained private access point could be legally closed by the landowner with the appropriate notice period. They had the mansion. We had the road. And without the road, the mansion was an island. I want to tell you about the 14 weeks between Clara's phone call and the gate, because those 14 weeks are the part of the story that most people never see. Not the confrontation. Not the gate. Not the court hearing. The 14 weeks of complete silence while everything was built. Meridian had no idea. Their mansion sat at the end of the gravel road in its landscaped grounds, and their sales team was probably already preparing the next luxury development in the next rural county with the next family's boundary in their sights. Business as usual. The specific comfortable business of a company that has never once been made to account for what it builds on. Every morning on the way to work, the roofline was visible above the tree line on the county highway. The solar panels catching the light. The gate Meridian had installed at the entrance to the gravel road, their gate, on our road, gleaming in the morning sun. Their gate. On our road. That detail never stopped being remarkable. Clara filed simultaneously in the 11th week. The formal encroachment claim on a Monday morning. The legal access road closure notice on the same day. Both documents landing on Meridian's attorney's desk on the Wednesday. Their attorney called Clara on Thursday morning. Clara called me Thursday afternoon. They want to talk. The word urgent came up 4 times in a 2-minute conversation. Tell them we are available in 60 days. After the legal notice period for the road closure completes. The silence on the other end of that call was the specific silence of someone who has just understood that the conversation they believed they were having is not the one that is actually happening. 60 days it is. But here is the thing that Meridian did not know. The thing that Clara's paralegal had found buried in the county records during those 14 quiet weeks that changed the nature of everything. Meridian had known about the boundary discrepancy before they broke ground. Not suspected it. Known it. In the internal file from their pre-construction survey, not the version filed with the county, the internal version not intended for external review, there was a note. A single paragraph flagging a potential boundary discrepancy on the southern edge of the property and recommending a follow-up survey before construction commenced. No follow-up survey had been commissioned. Construction had commenced anyway. They had seen the flag. Read the note. Made a decision. Built 17 feet into Caldwell land. Constructed a road across Caldwell property. Sold the estate for $10 million to a family who had no idea any of it existed. Collected the money. Moved on. The internal note was 3 paragraphs long. It was going to cost them everything. If this story is hitting something real for you right now, hit subscribe. I post every day and I do not want you to miss what comes next. The first offer came at 9:11 on the morning the gate went up. Not the attorney. Not a letter. The CEO of Meridian Luxury Estates calling Clara's direct line himself. Which told you everything about how seriously they had miscalculated. $200,000. For a permanent easement on the access road. Delivered with the specific confidence of a man who has always found that a large enough number ends a conversation before it becomes inconvenient. One shake of the head across the room was all Clara needed. The land is not for sale in any portion. The family will not be entering easement negotiations with a company currently facing an encroachment claim in the county court. The line went quiet for longer than was comfortable. Then, be reasonable. You are a family with a farmhouse. We are a company with resources. This does not have to be difficult. Leaning toward the phone. My great-grandmother purchased this land in 1924. She kept the deed in a fireproof box for the rest of her life. I have held that document. I know exactly what it says. The road is ours. The boundary is ours. And the encroachment your company chose to proceed with after your own internal survey flagged it is a matter that will now be resolved in court. The silence that followed that sentence was different from the earlier silence. It was the silence of a man who has just heard something that tells him the person on the other end of the line has already read the internal note. The call ended. Clara closed her notepad. Now the offer went up the following week. Not from Meridian. From a private mediator they had hired. $500,000. For the easement and a signed agreement not to pursue the encroachment claim further. The answer was the same. Then came the offer nobody expected. The one that required the most careful handling. The Hargroves. The family who had purchased the mansion from Meridian. A couple with 2 children who had paid $10 million in good faith for a property whose access situation and boundary issues had not appeared in a single document they had signed. They were not the enemy. They were the people Meridian had used as the final transaction in a chain of decisions made entirely at the Caldwell family's expense. Their attorney called Clara with a different kind of conversation entirely. No threats. No negotiations. Just an explanation of a family that had moved their children into a home and were now discovering that the foundation of everything they had purchased was built on information that had been deliberately withheld from them. 2 days of sitting with that. Then a decision. A temporary pedestrian access arrangement for the Hargrove family while their own legal situation with Meridian resolved itself. Their children would not walk to school through fields. That was not a battle worth having with people who had done nothing wrong. The vehicle access dispute remained exactly where it was. The gate stayed locked. But the Caldwell family extended one hand while the other held the key. That distinction mattered. Not for strategy. Because it was right. She arrived at the door on a Thursday afternoon 4 days after the gate went up. 71 years old. Hands that had worked land most of her life. The specific quality of someone who has processed something painful for long enough that they can carry it without it showing until they choose to put it down. Dorothy Hayes sat at the kitchen table and told her story without being asked. 2 counties over. 4 years earlier. 6 acres of land her family had held since the 1940s. A different development company. A boundary dispute that had gone to court. A documentation gap, a survey from 1962 that had never been properly filed with the county. A gap the developers had found before Dorothy's family had known to look for it. She lost 6 acres. 3 years of legal bills. A fight that had cost the family more than the land was worth in money and more than money could measure in everything else. She looked across the kitchen table. Do not be sorry for me. Be careful. Check everything. Every survey. Every filing. Every document your great-grandmother touched. Because the developers know where the gaps are before you do. They commission surveys for a reason, and it is not to protect you. Holding her gaze. Then she leaned forward slightly. I came here because I wanted to tell you that what you are doing matters beyond your fence line. There are families in this county who lost what you are holding right now. Every morning that gate stays locked is a morning those families know that someone held. And that matters more than you know from where you are sitting. Walking her to her car afterward. Watching her drive down the county highway in the late afternoon light. Then straight to the phone. Clara. Pull every survey. Every filing. Everything from 1924 to today. I want to be certain there are no gaps anywhere in the documentation chain. Already done. 3 weeks ago. The chain is complete. Good. A pause. Dorothy Hayes came to see you. You know her? I know her case. I wish I had been her attorney 4 years ago. What she lost should not have been lost. A long moment on the line. Then, be mine now. I already am. And we are going to win. The courthouse in our county is a functional building. Nothing ceremonial about it. Wood paneling that has not been updated since the 1980s. Fluorescent lighting. The specific smell of a room where difficult things have been decided for a very long time. Arriving at 8:45 with Clara and my mother. My mother had said very little in the weeks since the gate. Not from disengagement. She had been present for every document review, every phone call, every decision. But she had a way of letting things run their course before she spoke on them, and the hearing was the completion she had been waiting for. In the corridor outside the hearing room she took my hand. Not for comfort. As acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of a woman who has been holding something for a long time and is watching the holding produce its result. The hearing lasted 90 minutes. Meridian's attorney argued disproportionate harm. The Hargroves had children. The road closure affected innocent parties. The court should compel temporary vehicle access while the underlying dispute resolved. Clara argued that the voluntary pedestrian arrangement the Caldwell family had extended demonstrated good faith and that compelling vehicle access to a property built on illegally encroached land rewarded the precise conduct the encroachment claim was challenging. Then something happened that no one in the Caldwell corner had planned. Dorothy Hayes was in the public gallery. 3rd row. No legal standing. No reason to be there except the one reason that mattered, the decision that being present is its own form of testimony. Beside her were 4 other people. 3 women and a man. Families from the county. Boundary disputes of their own. Stories Dorothy knew and had been speaking about since the gate went up. All of them watching. Judge Carla Simmons looked at the gallery. Then at the documents Clara had submitted. Then at Meridian's attorney with the specific expression of someone who has read the internal survey note and does not require further persuasion. The road closure stands pending resolution of the underlying encroachment claim. The voluntary pedestrian access arrangement extended by the Caldwell family to the current residents is noted and appreciated by the court. The motion to compel vehicle access is denied. Meridian's attorney opened his mouth. Judge Simmons looked at him over her glasses. He closed it. In the gallery, Dorothy Hayes sat very still with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes forward, and an expression that I recognized because I had seen it in the mirror every morning since the gate went up. The expression of someone watching something hold that they had watched fall before. My mother's hand tightened once around mine. Then Clara closed her folder. And we walked out of that courthouse into the afternoon light, and everything was different. The fallout arrived in 3 directions at once, and none of them were slow. Meridian's encroachment case moved through the county court over the following 4 months with the specific momentum of a case where the documentation is unimpeachable and the opposing party has an internal note in their own file proving they knew what they were doing before they did it. The willful encroachment finding was the outcome Clara had been building towards since the 14 quiet weeks. Not negligence. Not oversight. Willful. The legal distinction between those 2 words is the difference between a company that made a mistake and a company that made a choice. Meridian had made a choice. The court ordered them to fund the removal of the guesthouse annexe from Caldwell land. A structure built to $10 million standards being dismantled and carted away from soil it had never had the right to sit on. The damages finding that accompanied the removal order was something Clara described as appropriate when she delivered the news. What does appropriate mean in actual numbers? She told me. Sitting with that number for a long moment. Then, is it enough to establish a land preservation fund for the county? A fund specifically for families facing boundary disputes who cannot afford the legal resources to fight back. A pause on the line. Then, it is more than enough for that. Then that is what it becomes. The Hargroves reached a separate resolution. Their misrepresentation claim against Meridian was handled by their own attorney and produced its own accounting. But the practical question of the access road required a direct solution. A formal easement agreement. Not a sale. The road remained Caldwell land permanently. A registered legal easement granting the Hargrove family vehicle access in exchange for an annual maintenance contribution and the explicit recorded acknowledgement that the road crossing was private Caldwell property accessed by permission. Their attorney had the terms reviewed on a Monday. By Thursday the Hargroves had signed. The gate remained. But there was now a legitimate key in the hands of people who had earned the right to hold one. 3 families from the county contacted Clara in the month after the hearing. Dorothy Hayes had been talking. The gate, the gallery, the denied motion, all of it moving through the community in the specific way that significant things move through places where people have been fighting the same fight from different positions for a long time. 2 of the 3 families had documentation gaps requiring careful work. The third had a case Clara believed was stronger than the Caldwell case had ever been. She took all 3 on. The gate had become something larger than a gate. My mother planted a garden at the southern boundary the following spring. Perennials. The kind that come back every year without being replanted. The kind that establish their roots below the surface and hold regardless of what happens above ground. She chose each plant deliberately, telling me the name of each one and why she had chosen it for the boundary specifically. Not for the rest of the 12 acres. For here. For this line. For this exact place where the concrete survey markers set by Estelle's surveyor in 1924 were still sitting in the ground after 100 years. Estelle would have planted something here. To mark it. To make the holding visible. She planted the concrete posts. A long look at the markers still doing their work after a century. Yes. And now we plant these too. Both kinds of marking. Legal and living. Below the ground and above it. The kind that endures and the kind that grows. Dorothy Hayes came to walk the fence line on a Saturday in May. Moving slowly with her hands behind her back and her eyes taking in the garden and the markers and the roof line visible above the tree line at the end of the gravel road. How does it feel now? Not what it was supposed to feel like. What it actually felt like. It feels like something that was always true being officially acknowledged. The land was always ours. The documentation always said so. The gate and the court ruling and the damages and the fund, none of that made it ours. It was already ours. Estelle made it ours in September of 1924, and it has been ours every day since. All of this just made it impossible for anyone to pretend otherwise. Dorothy stood at the boundary for a long time. That is what I came to hear. Then she turned and looked at the mansion roofline above the trees. The $10 million monument to the assumption that money is more powerful than a 100-year-old deed in a fireproof box. They really thought they had you. They thought a farmhouse family would be too tired or too scared or too underfunded to hold. She nodded slowly. They always think that. Inside afterward for tea. Sitting at the same kitchen table where she had told her story months earlier. The table where every significant conversation in this fight had happened. Where the documents had been laid out. Where the decisions had been made. She held her cup for a moment before drinking and looked around the kitchen. Your great-grandmother built something here. Not just the house. Something that held across 100 years and 4 generations and everything this county and this world threw at it. Yes. What are you going to do with the rest of it? Build more of the same. She smiled. The specific smile of someone hearing exactly what they needed to hear. Good. Because there are more families out there who need to see it done. The gate is still locked. The key is still in my jacket pocket. Every morning I put it there before I leave the house. Not as a gesture. Not as a reminder. As the simple physical practice of a woman who understands that some things require daily tending, and the tending of this particular thing is one of the most important things she will do today. I think about Estelle sometimes when I put the key in my pocket. Not the Estelle of the history books or the family legend or the way her name gets said at holiday dinners with a particular quality of reverence. The actual Estelle. The woman who walked into a county clerk's office with 22 years of savings and a lawyer she had searched the entire region to find and negotiated the purchase of 12 acres in a county that did not want her to have them. She was not thinking about legacy when she did that. She was thinking about land. About what it meant to own the ground under your feet in a country that had spent a very long time telling her that the ground under her feet could never be hers. She was wrong about that. And so was everyone who came after her who believed the same thing. The deed has been in the family for 100 years. The concrete survey markers have been in the ground for 100 years. The fireproof box has been passed from mother to daughter for 100 years. Each one of them understanding that the document inside it was not just ownership. It was the recorded answer to every person who would ever look at this land and assume it could be taken. You cannot take what is documented. You cannot build on what you do not own and expect the ground to cooperate. You cannot construct a $10 million mansion on ancestral soil and forget to check whose name is on the deed and expect that oversight to stay hidden forever. The survey markers were always there. The deed was always clear. The road was always ours. Meridian did not create the situation. They revealed it. They revealed exactly what happens when a company with resources and confidence and the assumption that a farmhouse family will not fight decides to build on ground that was never theirs and sell it to someone else and collect the money and move on. What happens is a $47 padlock. What happens is a key in a pocket. What happens is 4 generations of documentation meeting one generation that finally had everything it needed to use it. Dorothy Hayes asked me once what I wanted people to take from this story. The answer came without thinking. Check your deed. Find the box your grandmother put it in. Read the survey. Know your boundary. And understand that the documentation does not care how much money the person on the other side of the fence line has. It only cares what it says. It only cares what it says. And what ours says has not changed since September of 1924. 12 acres. Caldwell land. Boundary confirmed. Access road included. The gate is locked. The key is in my pocket. And the garden my mother planted at the southern boundary is coming back for the 2nd year now without being replanted because that is what perennials do. They hold. That is what quiet storm is. Not revenge. Not noise. Just a woman who understood, quietly and deliberately, what it truly costs to rise. Subscribe. Because there is another storm coming tomorrow. They built a $10 million mansion and forgot that the most powerful thing on that property was not the marble or the glass or the solar array. It was a fireproof box. And the woman who knew exactly what was inside it.